Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. Excuse me. And this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. You can tell I have a little bit of a throat thing going on. It's one of those things that's been sort of building for a couple days in a way that doesn't typically happen for me. We are going to hopefully, and I can almost tell it's even getting better here right now. I'm a little bit of a red light guy. Red light comes on, I'm sort of, I do sort of find a way to get it done. So we're going to try to construct this show in such a way that whatever's going on with my throat, my voice, is not too annoying. We do think we have a really good show for you here today. I'm circling back on a question I sort of once asked about one of Georgia's most important players for this season. We'll tell you about that. Terrence Edwards stops by. That's always really good stuff. And one of our longtime arch enemies, if you will, has said something about one of our favorite sons, and it feels like a pretty good place to sort of stir stuff up off the top. What did Steve Spurrier say about Stetson Bennett that some Georgia fans didn't like, and how does that relate to the ongoing quarterback conversation here at Georgia here right now? That's where we'll begin things today. We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
People are asking how in the world we could have such a great show planned today, given the hectic schedule of the host involved. Many of you perhaps watched us last night, yesterday afternoon as well, on the Peachtree Sports Network. Our high school football season got off to a start. We had, 3 lightning delays. My head finally hit the pillow last night. 1:37, really more like 1:45 a.m. Head sort of hits the pillow last night, and yet from my home in the far reaches of rural North Georgia, back here Midtown Atlanta studios to kind of get things going for DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp here today. Wouldn't miss it for the world. We think we have a great show, as I said before. I will warn you that for whatever reason I have a little bit of a voice thing going on. Hopefully that won't be too annoying. In fact, I can sort of already tell that it feels like it's getting a little bit better. So hopefully that is indeed the case as we roll on here today. I do not have games tonight. We will have a doubleheader there tomorrow from Rome, Barron Stadium. I love it. We're so happy to have football back, but this is among the more taxing weeks of the year, just sort of the way that it goes. Sometimes that's what the work schedule provides. And yet, we are really excited about what we're talking about here today. Some of it quarterback here to begin with. So let's do something just sort of for fun, and then we'll kind of bring it to a little bit more of a present tense conversation about what Georgia currently has going on at quarterback. I saw in the midst of my preparations for games yesterday, Georgia fans kind of getting fired up about something one of our longtime arch enemies apparently said. He goes on, and I guess he does it maybe every week, or he's certainly with, you may remember Pat Dooley, longtime writer for the Gainesville Sun. So Dooley obviously covered Florida for a long time, has a podcast, knows Steve Spurrier well, and they're on there kind of talking about stuff related to college football, and in kind of describing what might make this year unique, and what it might take to win a championship in a year like this, and the role that quarterbacks could play in that. Some detected what they thought was an unfair jab taken at the great Georgia legend Stetson Bennett, slander of the career of Stetson Bennett. Some Georgia fans were not happy with Steve Spurrier from Pat Dooley, longtime Florida writer, his podcast. This is one of those we report, you decide type of things. We're going to play it for you. Judge for yourself. Is Spurrier unfairly taking a jab here at Stetson Bennett? Let's listen to it from the Dooley Noted podcast.
I think there's 2 areas that are probably going to determine the best teams. Obviously, coaching is important, and then the special players. It could be the quarterback, but it could be other guys.
You hit it right on the head. I think your stars are going to play like stars.
Yeah, Georgia won 2 national championships with Stetson Bennett.
Yeah.
So the quarterback, he needs to be a good player, but he doesn't have to be, one of those guys that throws for 300 yards every game and so forth.
I think the reason why some Georgia fans were bothered is because of the inflection in Spurrier's voice. It's like, heck, Georgia won 2 national titles with Stetson Bennett, as if just saying the name itself was enough of a punchline. And One of the things you perhaps notice about me is I don't do a lot of media beefs. I just don't have the energy for that. I've got kids. I've got a busy life. I don't have time to be like feuding with like media types. I just don't have time. The list of like sports media people that I don't like is pretty long, but I, for the most part, keep those opinions to myself because if you can't say something nice, maybe you just don't say anything at all. However, one cannot help but notice in this particular clip we just played, when Spurrier says Stetson Bennett, as if that alone was enough to sort of elicit a laugh, Dooley, the former Florida writer, does kind of give you a ha, 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 ha. Let me just say this. If you're connected to the University of Florida, or really any SEC team, in this particular case, we happen to be talking about the lousy, stinking Gators, here's what I will tell you. You do not get to laugh about any of that because, frankly, other than a pandemic year that we know doesn't count, Florida has not beaten Georgia in a very long time. In fact, we have a segment dedicated to that at the end of the show. Perhaps you've heard it. You don't get to laugh at Stetson Bennett. You don't get to laugh at anything related to Georgia football. This idea that this is a classic Spurrier giving you the zinger, Stetson Bennett, and then the writer's like, ha, 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 ha. You don't get to laugh about this. Stetson Bennett and the contemporaries that play with him at Georgia has rendered Florida an irrelevant program. And with the success that Georgia's enjoyed, the chapters of SEC history that prominently feature Steve Spurrier, they get pushed further and further into the recesses of people's mind to the point now that a lot of that is either forgotten, on the verge of being forgotten. So Steve Spurrier doesn't get to use Stetson Bennett as a punchline for a joke. Florida people don't get to laugh at that. That's just the way that goes, is that Georgia, with its 2 national championships under Kirby Smart, represents contemporary SEC history. And whatever happened with Steve Spurrier at Florida is frankly ancient history, to the point that you have to be of a certain age to have even been alive to experience it. And that's just the facts. Eventually, legacies kind of get forgotten. And the Spurrier legacy right now, look around. You can see this happening. Because that's just the way that it goes. The Spurrier legacy is on its way to being forgotten. In fact, I'll give you a classic example of this. I was standing with Arch Manning at SEC Media Days the other day, and he didn't mean this as a shot or a jab or anything like that, but he mentioned something about Steve Spurrier. He's like, is Spurrier in the Hall of Fame? Trying to check himself to make sure that was true. And the reason why he would ask that is because Manning is like, what, 20 years old maybe. Spurrier, his career a long time ago. Stetson Bennett also kind of essentially in this decade, in this sort of like 5-year span here of the 2020s, having great success. So guess what? Steve Spurrier, whether actually this counts as a jab or not, I'm a little, I guess, suspicious of whether or not that's true. But to the extent some Georgia fans were bothered by it, Spurrier doesn't get to use Bennett's name as a joke. Florida people don't get to laugh at it because of just the sheer tonnage of the success that Georgia's had against Florida. But, as we mentioned a moment ago, we were going to kind of use this for some fun to kind of kick things off, but sort of pivot it to a more, I guess, sort of grounded conversation in what's currently happening in the sport. I think the overall point that Spurrier is making there is not without merit. That, and we have been saying this, that there was a period of time in the kind of, I guess, the middle portion of the college football playoff era where, and a lot of this was sort of shifted by Alabama, but ultimately they weren't the biggest beneficiaries of it, where quarterback play kind of became paramount for the very best teams. Think about Trevor Lawrence, an eventual number 1 overall pick for Clemson. Joe Burrow, the real classic example of this for LSU, but in and around that, there were others. There's the Tua Tagovailoa, who in a starter year in 2018 kind of came up just short, although obviously he did come off the bench in 2017. But it was sort of an era where the best teams had great quarterback, Deshaun Watson also for Clemson, and oftentimes they were beating other very, kind of high-value quarterbacks along the way to do that. There was a period of time where it seemed like this was really a kind of a quarterback-driven sport. Best teams just had the best quarterbacks. But in this decade, that sort of changed. And look, Stetson Bennett is a legendary figure for Georgia, but he was not a first-round pick. He has not yet become an NFL starter, although maybe he might. He was a Heisman finalist, didn't win the award. So from a kind of a just sort of a technical description standpoint, Bennett is not viewed the same way that other all-time great quarterbacks would be viewed because of where he was drafted and kind of some of that kind of stuff. Just from a sort of basic description standpoint, Bennett is probably a level below what other quarterbacks might be. Played miraculously well in the biggest games for Georgia, and that's why he's so revered by Georgia fans. But in terms of how we typically measure the sort of great quarterbacks, Bennett's probably a level below some of that. Didn't win the Heisman, wasn't drafted in the first round, things of that nature, and I think you probably understand that. And around the time that Bennett's had the success that he had, the quarterbacks that were seemingly getting more accolades than Bennett, they just weren't winning national championships. Bryce Young, Alabama, classic example of this. There have been others as well. Even last year when, Will Howard leads Ohio State to the national championship. In doing so, he eventually becomes, like a sixth-round pick. This was not a great quarterback the way we typically measure that. The teams that did have the so-called great quarterbacks, the number 1 overall pick, Cam Ward, by the time we got to the college football playoff, Miami was nowhere to be found. So if you want to go back, say, a little less than 10 years ago, best quarterbacks, best teams, they seem to be really paired up, and they kind of coincided with each other. In the years since then, there's been a bit of a departure of that. Best teams don't necessarily have the best quarterback. Best quarterbacks don't necessarily play on the best teams. And the best that we can tell, there's a very good chance that trend perhaps continues this year in college football too. And so for Georgia, it's one of the reasons why we think, some of the talk around Gunnar Stockton is frankly coming from sort of media sources that sort of only know quarterback. They don't really know the rest of the roster, don't really know the rest of the storylines. They sort of fixate in a very surface level way on the quarterback talk because that's all they really have. So a lot of the chatter around Stockton we think has kind of been overstated given the overall landscape in the sport that I do think in a roundabout way, whether he meant to or not, maybe it was accidental, Spurrier kind of described pretty well that hey, you don't necessarily have to be the number 1 overall pick, Joe Burrow having the Babe Ruth style season for your team to win a national championship. You just got to have great players in your roster, and your quarterbacks got to play well enough to give you a chance to win. And it is around this point in the conversation that I think some people probably assume that I'm going to say, and Gunnar Stockton can be for Georgia in 2025 the version of what Stetson Bennett was for Georgia in 2021 and 2022. And maybe he will. I mean, obviously there are what some people kind of view as similarities, the same way that Bennett was sort of constantly counted out, we think unfairly. Stockton seems to be getting some of that here right now. We'll find out during the season how unfair or not maybe that is. Bennett seemed to be quite popular with many of his teammates in a way that wasn't always captured outside the program. It seems like Stockton is a version of that right now. There's even been more chatter about this in the last couple of days, about what the relationship was like between Georgia and Carson Beck a year ago. At a certain point, it's probably time to let that go. But this has been a pretty big topic on social media this week on the basis, I think it was something that maybe Bud Elliott from CBS Sports had said. I think some of that's true. I do think there were a lot of people, including players that you like, who you think play the game the right way. They sort of got real tired of Carson Beck last year. I don't think that's wrong. And you put a microphone in their face and they would have just praised Carson up one side and down the other. In fact, they did. But privately, I had reason to believe that their personal feelings were actually a little different than what they were saying in public, the same way a lot of us sort of put on the happy face we need to. I think there was some of that with Georgia a year ago, although it's probably time to sort of, put that to bed. But overall, while there is maybe a hope and a belief that maybe Gunnar Stockton can be what Stetson Bennett once was, I also think that there is a chance that what Gunnar really can be for Georgia is a slightly different template than the one that Bennett put on display. Bennett was extraordinary in the big moments. And honestly, that's one of the things that I think attracts us to sports. When guys are just sort of better in big moments, that's a really attractive quality. It's the kind of thing that fascinates us, whether it's, Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, guys that come up big in clutch moments. That's just a really, I think, inspiring sort of thing. We'd all like to sort of be at our best in the moments that matter most. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. when we see our favorite athletes do that. It's just really cool. And Bennett just sort of had a way of being extraordinary in the biggest moments. The stats tell the tale. College football playoff, Jeff Santel once called them the sort of stage games, the kind of game when it's over, you sort of roll out the stage and you present the trophy. If there was a stage to be rolled out, that's the sort of game that Bennett was going to be at his most extraordinary. And that's one of the reasons why he's such a historic figure around the Georgia program. And maybe that's what Gunnar Stockton will do too. Certainly at some point in time, he's going to probably have to play really big in a big moment. That's just the nature of the quarterback position. However, I do think there's also an aspect of the Stockton career that begins this season or continues this season after getting a chance to get some pretty significant playing time at the end of last year. I think there's an aspect of Stockton's career that could be different than what Stetson Bennett was. That while Bennett was extraordinary, look, there were also some sort of regular run-of-the-mill games, the kind of games that didn't get the same national attention. If we're being honest, Stetson was not always great in those games. It's one of the reasons why the sort of sports talk debate around Bennett was always so intense, is because whatever you believed about Stetson in a roundabout way, you could kind of find some evidence to sort of support your point. If you want to say, I'm not quite so sure Stetson's all that good, you could sort of cite, whatever. And a lot of folks unfairly did that, kind of using that as a cudgel to beat up on him and sort of, stir the pot with Georgia fans. A lot of that was gross at the time. It looks horrible in retrospect. You certainly lived through some of that. But, you could point to a game here and there where maybe Bennett wasn't exactly at his best. But then the Stetson Bennett fans, of which there are many, could point to all the big games in which, as I said before, Bennett was just simply extraordinary. But here's what I think Gunnar Stockton could do well, and in doing so could kind of cast himself in a little bit of a different light than the way the Stetson Bennett career played out. I don't know, even in the very biggest games that Georgia will play this season, you necessarily need Gunnar to be your hero. What if Gunnar just does ordinary in an extraordinary way? What if Gunnar Stockton just simply shows up to the ballpark every Saturday ready to give you a consistent performance where you kind of know what you're going to get from quarterback, teammates trust what you're going to get from quarterback, maybe in a way that didn't quite exist for Georgia a year ago based on stuff we continue to hear? What if Gunnar Stockton just does the ordinary in an extraordinary way? Couldn't that possibly be enough for Georgia here this season? And didn't we sort of see a version of that from Gunnar in the game against Notre Dame? Now, that was not a win for Georgia, and it was obviously a disappointing day because of it. But Stockton certainly seemed to contribute to Georgia's chances of winning the game that day. It was not necessarily spectacular, but it was, for the most part, I would say, Gunnar doing his job. Ordinary stuff done in an extraordinary way. If he could do that more consistently here for the 2025 season, maybe that's the kind of playing personality that Stockton could show to all of us. In fact, if you want to go back to the game in the Sugar Bowl where Stockton made his first start, big platform to be making your first start, this is what Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo said the other day about kind of what he learned from Gunnar throughout all of that.
I thought Gunnar was ready for the moment in the SEC championship game, and it's a hard spot to be in. It's something you talk about with your guys all the time. You're one player right way, but quarterback's a different position than any other position. There's other positions, they might not be the starter, but they might get in a rotation. They might get to play on special teams, so they felt what it's like to be in a game, and a quarterback's a little bit different. But I thought Gunnar last year took a step during practice of approaching every practice like it was a game and preparing like he was a starter. And those just aren't words. Gunnar probably prepared as hard as anybody on our football team, and he didn't know if he was going to play a snap. So he was ready as far as a preparation standpoint. I know there were certain things he knows he wishes he could have done better, and he's been working on those things in the offseason and through fall camp so he can be a more efficient player at that position.
So let me sum this up this way. Steve Spurrier kind of takes a weird thing at Stetson Bennett. You can decide for yourself how problematic that was. We think that's obviously an incorrect evaluation of Bennett's career, but Spurrier's probably not incorrect when he says you don't necessarily have to be a great, future first-round quarterback to have a great team here right now in college football. The evidence around the sport would suggest that's true. So how, in the light of that, can Gunner be what Georgia needs for him to be? As I said, there is something about just doing the ordinary stuff in an extraordinary way. If you kind of play the hero's role the way that Bennett did in a game against Ohio State, or a national championship game against Alabama in the fourth quarter, more power to you. But as Mike Bobo said there, what we like about Gunner Stockton is he shows up to practice, even in a year when he's not expecting to play and not the starter. He shows up preparing as if he was the starter. That's just a regular, run-of-the-mill, ordinary day, but Stockton tried to go about his business in an extraordinary way. And that might be a pretty fun template for Georgia here this year. Maybe not a future first-round pick, maybe not a Heisman winner, maybe not what the world thinks of as a great quarterback. But just because the world doesn't call him great doesn't mean that Stockton can't do a great job for these Dogs here this year. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We are glad you are with us. Video, it's 10 a.m. live, and then on demand after that. Radio Athens, Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. We're just really glad to have you as a part of our show today. And a huge thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make it all possible. I love our partnership with them. I'm proud of the long-standing relationship that we have with them. When we think about a 10th anniversary here, more than 2,500 episodes now of doing the show, one of the great sources of pride that I have is over the course of this now decade doing DawgNation Daily, so many of our sponsors have been with us now for almost the entire time. And Merriweather and Tharp has been with us virtually since the beginning. Not quite since the beginning, but virtually since the beginning. And when I think about my professional accomplishments, the long-standing relationship I have with my partners is the thing that I am most proud of. It's just, I'm so thankful for it. And I do love Bob Tharp and the entire team there at Merriweather and Tharp. Now, nobody loves divorce. We understand that. Divorce is scary. It's confusing. It's, frankly, not an emotionally neutral topic. You have some experience with this. It may be your own divorce. Maybe you remember your parents. Maybe it's just a friend. But you are not more than 1 degree of separation away from a divorce story. And all divorce stories come with a sort of a heavy emotional way. I get that. So if you can avoid it, I really think it would be in your vested interest to find a way to save the relationship that you're in and create a happier tomorrow with your spouse. I think you'd be wise to do that. But here's what we also know. The statistics bear this out. For some people, that's just not what's going to happen. Eventually, the relationship is just kind of severed. It's just not going to be repaired. It is an unavoidable next step, perhaps in your case. And so at that point in time, it's not about what could we have done in the past. It's about what can we do now. And having a strong, wise advocate on your side to provide really valuable counsel to set you up for more success in the next season of your life, it's one of the most important things you can do. In fact, in that particular situation, it may be the most important thing you can do. And now across the entire state of Georgia, our friends at Merriweather and Tharp want to provide that for you. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's the place you can go to sort of start getting some of your questions answered about the divorce process. And one of those, I'm just going to be real practical about this, right? I mean, there's no reason to sort of beat around the bush and sugarcoat this. One of the first questions that some people kind of ask is, how much is this going to cost me? Well, our friends at Merriweather and Tharp have, I think, put kind of a menu of options on the table for you, from everything to like a DIY up to like the more traditional service, the way that you might think of an attorney providing that. There's also what they've created, and this is sort of kind of a proprietary type thing. They call it their model M&T level of service that kind of creates, I think, a lot more cost certainty for people who seek that, which frankly is going to be most of the people that would go through a situation like this. So this is the sort of forward-thinking stuff they do to anticipate the questions of people who kind of go through a challenging situation like this, and you wouldn't have this kind of institutional knowledge had you not been through cases perhaps similar to yours thousands of times in the past. So find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That is GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we got Terrence Edwards coming up. Thrilled about having him on the show today. Let me do a quick note for you as well. Ongoing is our preparations for our DawgNation Invasion coming up in Knoxville in September. One of the great events we've done, we've been hearing from people in our chat on the live comment section of the show saying, BA, can't wait to be a part of DawgNation Invasion. I'm thrilled about that. It's just one of the best events we've ever done. Going back to our big riverboat takeover in 2023 there on the Tennessee River before Georgia beat down Tennessee that day. And we think this year, it's coming up September 13th, we think it's going to be just as much fun again. We want you to be a part of it. First 125 to sign up, secure themselves kind of a guaranteed DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. Beyond 125, I can't tell you. But for the first 125, we can guarantee you DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. You also get the food on board the boat. You get the bar and the drink tickets to go along with that. You get a chance to hang out with us, the DawgNation folks, and some of the best Georgia fans you'll ever tailgate with in a tailgate unlike any other you'll ever be able to have. It's our DawgNation Invasion with the riverboat on the Tennessee River. This is just an unbelievable experience. Obviously, more than half of our audience listens on podcasts, so you're not seeing the images of this right now. But for those of you watching on video, how cool does that look? This was one of the great days, a memorable moment, and we can't wait to come back and do it again with you here in 2025. Just a few weeks away right now. In fact, we are now inside of a month of the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. So DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that today. All right, before we get Terrence Edwards, let me try to speak English here. Before we get Terrence Edwards, let me get ready to go around the doghouse presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And I want to circle back on a conversation that we had a lot near the beginning of this calendar year. When the transition from like the 2024 season to the preparation of the 2025 season first began, one of the things that we were talking about a lot was my belief after, I think, a better freshman season than some people realize for Nate Frazier, that Frazier could be on his way to being kind of a great player for Georgia this season. More than a good player, more than a complimentary piece, someone that could maybe be a sort of a featured focal point of the offense. We said, hey, for the first time in a while, maybe Frazier gives Georgia a chance to have a 1,000-yard rusher. Well, over the course of the last few months, we have kind of softened our tone on that a bit because, Robinson seems like he's come back healthy. Georgia goes out and get a Josh McCray, transfer portal guy from Illinois. He had some success with the Illini a year ago. Bo Walker's been talked up. Chauncey Bowen's got a little bit of buzz coming off the scrimmage on Saturday. That all these other running backs started getting talked about. That what we were eventually sort of forced to conclude is, well, maybe even with Frazier putting up really good numbers as a freshman a year ago, this is still likely to be the sort of ensemble cast running back by committee for Georgia. They want to be upgraded with their running back performance, but maybe it's not necessarily Frazier in a featured role. However, if we're being honest, Josh McCray is here, but it seems like from a conditioning standpoint, battled illness, that he may be a little ways away from being able to really help Georgia. And, Robinson is coming back off an injury, but boy, sometimes, once again, if we're being honest, that can be a little slow going. And yeah, the buzz around Bo Walker is good, but he's still just a true freshman. And okay, well, maybe Chauncey Bowen's ready to take a step up. A guy that I think that also played more in the scrimmage than people realized last Saturday was Dwight Phillips. Okay, well, maybe Phillips is ready to kind of be a piece of this. He's certainly providing the elusiveness and the wiggle that a lot of Georgia running backs kind of sometimes don't seem to have in quite the same measure. But, Phillips not the biggest guy either. So some of the second guessing now starts to happen as you get a little closer, and now you kind of circle back to the point that you made back in January of, well, maybe Georgia needs Nate Frazier to be a great player, and can Frazier actually be that great player? Well, let me go back to Mike Bobo last week in talking about Frazier, what he's seen from him, what he wants to see more. I thought Bobo had a really interesting phrase about what Frazier needs to do more of here this year. I think this is really interesting. It's candid from Bobo. This is from last week. Take a listen.
Well, I want to give Nate and his coach, Coach Crawford, a lot of credit because he was one of the few guys that did not come in mid-year last year. He got here in June, and Nate is a tireless worker. He's always in Coach Crawford's office or in the bullpen with some of our aquatic control guys, trying to catch up. Running back, Not as complex as some of the other positions, except for pass protection. But this guy dove in. He worked extremely hard. Early in the year, it was, we're trying to get him on the field and get him some touches, and didn't put him in a lot of situations that would involve pass protection. By the end of the year, we weren't afraid to, to have him in there on third down. So I think he's growing as a complete back. I think his next step is, stop trying to look for the home run all the time. That's something we got to get better with all the backs, is that we got to learn to get the dirty yards, and every play's not going to be a home run. A lot of these backs, in high school, they're the best player on the field, and they can bounce anything and turn an average play into an explosive play by bouncing it and out running. This league's different, and, working on his steps, working on his vision, and keying the right defender up front and pressing the hole and hitting. And that's something I think in the first 6 practices you've seen an improvement of Nate being willing to stick it in there and get the dirty yards.
First of all, I love the phrase dirty yards. We would say those kind of tough yards between the tackle that Bobo calls dirty yards. Georgia didn't get nearly enough of that a year ago. It's one of the reasons why the running game was so deficient. I think that Bobo also brings up a really good point. We saw this last night on Peachtree Sports Network. Prince Avenue Christian's got Andrew Beard, one of the top junior running backs in America. Mooney Gibson from Cal, that's another big-time recruit, also a junior. And when you watch really good running backs at the high school level, it all looks easy. There aren't a lot of dirty yards for a running back in high school who's so much better than his competition the way that Frazier would have been. The college game is a big wake-up call, in other words, because everything is hard in college football, even if you're a great athlete. And I think Frazier's ability to kind of get the dirty yards this season, tough stuff between the tackles, that's going to determine a lot of how much he takes that next step towards being more than just a good player, but among the featured players in the Georgia offense. I think that's a really good description from Mike Bobo there. Earlier this week, Kirby Smart also had his turn to provide an evaluation of Nate Frazier. This is what Kirby had to say.
His knowledge and pickups, third down, pass pro, knowing when I can get in, when I can get out, when I have to stay in and protect, how I protect. The knowledge and understanding of that is not having to rely on the quarterback to tell him. I think that's big. His confidence in his run and his ability to give effort and conditioning level is much better than he was as a freshman.
So Smart obviously kind of leans in on the stuff related to the pass pro. And I get that. And obviously that's one of the things that can keep you off the field. Maybe a year ago at times that kept Frazier off the field. But let's also not pretend, with Georgia harping on the need to improve the run game as much as it is, that somehow the evaluation of Nate Frazier begins with his pass protection. For a team that was outside the top 100 in rushing yards per game a year ago, that's just simply not true. We know that, but we also know why Smart sometimes says the things that he says. And of course, for Frazier to truly take that next step, some of that's not just on him. Some of that's about an offensive line that's trying to also show some improvement this year and gel together with some new faces and just kind of come together with a improved performance over what it had in 2024. Earlier this week, Kirby Smart also provided his evaluation of how he thinks that offensive line is doing here right now as well.
Yeah, I want to continue to see an identity of toughness, physical, setting edges in the run game, getting the defense, and it's what we have to be, and we need to have a great run game to, number one, help our quarterback, relieve third and longs, feature backs, and then utilize play action. So those guys are working really hard. Been pleased with the group. They continue to work hard and do what we need to do. We'll be where we need to be.
So let me kind of sum all this up. I talk for an hour every day. We do this show every day. And if you let me talk long enough, I will probably eventually sort of find my way on both sides of some issues. Try not to. But a little bit of meandering, you sort of can't help it. It's probably just human nature. And this may be an example of that. A few months ago, I'm all about Nate Frazier, 1,000-yard rusher. Around the time of spring practice, early summer, we'd sort of receded back from that a bit to, well, now it's sort of back more ensemble cast, a lot of running backs getting touches. Maybe that's still true, but the closer we get to the season, the more I start to kind of reverse back to where I was a few months ago. I think for this Georgia running game to be everything it can be, they probably do need the big performance from Nate Frazier. And seeing how true that ends up being, That could be one of the real stories to be told for Georgia here this fall, and that is around the Doghouse. It's presented by our friends at Daytona Beach. Still a few days left for you, a few weeks left for you to enjoy kind of the true summer vacation here. And that means if you didn't kind of get the planning together and get the vacation plan for your family, well, this is a great time to do that with our friends at Daytona Beach. One of the reasons why is A, it's convenient to get to. You can fly there from Atlanta. They have an international airport. Also, with 23 miles of shoreline, there's all kinds of hotels and resort opportunities for you. That means even kind of a late date here, kind of late in the summer, you can still get perhaps better savings than you realize on some wonderful lodging opportunities right there at Daytona Beach. And plus, you'll take advantage of one of the great beaches in America with so much fun stuff to do, great restaurants to enjoy, outdoor activities like surfing and fishing and golf and things like that. There's a lot to enjoy at Daytona Beach, and I think it's time for you to enjoy it. So please find them online. It's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That is DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. All right, we love Georgia football conversation. We especially love a great conversation with a terrific former Dog. So let's do that right now with Terrence Edwards here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Appreciate our guy Terrence Edwards being with us. Of course, Terrence getting ready for a high school season there with his Mount Vernon team. High school football kind of starting all across the state here right now. In fact, tonight, big game involving Buford and Milton. What a game that is. Of course, Terrence got deep ties to the Milton program, former offensive assistant there before becoming the head coach there at Mount Vernon. Terrence, I didn't mean to ask you about this, but I guess since I bring it up, new $60+ million stadium, Milton, one of the best teams in the country. That's quite a season opening game tonight. We'll see on ESPN between Milton and Buford, is it not?
I think so. I think this is two of the best programs in our state. Like you said, I have deep ties to the Milton program, coaching there for 2 years as the pass game coordinator, winning the state championship before I departed to become the head coach at Mount Vernon. So I'm going to be watching this game with a little different eye and pulling for the Milton Eagles, trying to go do something a lot of people haven't had opportunity to do is go back to back for Ben Reeves and company.
And they're obviously Luke Nicholas left, gone to Miami, two-time state champion. Their quarterback moved in from like one of the big power programs in Florida, like St. Thomas Aquinas or something like that. Have you seen the new Milton quarterback?
Yes, I have. Yes, he did move in from St. Thomas, and he is as good as advertised.
Good.
He's about 6'1", about 220. He's built very well. He throws the ball extremely well. So I'm excited to see him in his first action tonight. We all know Stevie Jackson is one of the best offensive coordinators in the whole country. So just excited to see how Derek Baker leads his Milton Eagles now without CJ and without Ethan and without Luke being the quarterback. So it's a new group there, but I expect the same thing out of that group.
And, of course, Buford debuting a brand-new stadium and obviously all kinds of national expectations for them once again, too. So, fun game tonight in the state of Georgia. Also, we got night 2 of the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic as well. So, a lot going on with high school football. Let me shift, though, to Georgia, Terrence. And what I told the audience before you joined us was, hey, back in, like, February, I'm like, Nate Frazier, 1,000-yard season. I think it can happen. Georgia might need for it to happen. I was all about that. Then, as I sometimes do, I kind of meander in the direction of, well, no, maybe it's more ensemble cast. Josh McCray's a good player. They've brought him in. Bo Walker may get his touches. Roderick Robinson seems to be healthy. Maybe it's sort of back to being ensemble cast again. Well, now, as you get closer to the season, because of some question marks, we don't know when Josh McCray is sort of a full participant able to help Georgia. How healthy is Roderick Robinson really? Can you really trust a freshman like Bo Walker? Some of these, are we sure about ... Well, that has sort of caused me to kind of go back to where I was maybe a few months ago, kind of back around the idea that, you know what, maybe however you define it statistically speaking, maybe Georgia needs Nate Frazier to be more than just a good player, the sort of potential focal point for an offense. What do you think the outlook, I guess, needs to be for Frazier, and how much of those expectations he's likely to be able to live into?
Well, we all thought Nate Frazier was going to be an excellent player coming out of California. And he proved that last year. He showed flashes of greatness, and we believe that he could take the next step. Just one thing for me that I need to see from Nate is ball protection. He did put the ball on the ground a few times last year. So that's one of the biggest things that I would like to see him take care of. His ability is going to take care of everything else. He has all the natural abilities. He's big, he's fast, he runs with power, he has vision. Now for me, just let's take the next step. This is not high school football anymore. This is the SEC, the best college conference in the world. So now he has to protect the ball better. So that's what I'm going to be watching from Nate, just to see if his ball security has gotten better.
No, I think that's a really good point. Shifting to wide receiver here for a moment. We've obviously talked about these guys a lot, but that's kind of the point, Terrence. You know, people like me and folks who watch or listen to our show, we're trying to grab any kind of like rumor or whisper that we're getting coming out of Georgia Fall Camp, and the stuff that we hear repeatedly, I think, just matters a lot more. I would say that when you're hearing the same thing from multiple people on multiple days, I just think it has a lot more weight to it, more likely to be true. And I'm talking about, Terrence, for virtually the entire year, it's a lot of good stuff about Zachariah Branch, a lot of good stuff about Noah Thomas, transfers who have really, I think, made a lot of admirers for themselves since they've been here. And that, I think, for both guys, certainly in the case of Zachariah Branch, continued with the scrimmage on Saturday. Barring some sort of, I mean, obviously, you know, unfortunate injury or something like that, it just really seems like Branch and Thomas are going to be a big part of this Georgia offense this season, does it not?
We would hope so. We didn't bring them here not to be a part of the plan going forward. I just think with Kobe, with Thomas, with Branch, I think those three, along with Landon Humphreys and Dylan Bell, I just think that group of experienced receivers, along with the freshmen with Tylen Taylor and C.J. Wiley, I just think that group, top to bottom, is very, very talented. So I'm excited to see those guys on the field in a couple weeks. And I think they're going to bring something that Georgia has not had before. I mean, we got two guys that are 6'4", and then another guy that is 6'6", along with the speedy, shifty Zachariah Branch. So I'm excited to see this group perform. I think this group definitely needs to step up, breaking in a new quarterback this year, and being able to have two guys that are 6'4" and 6'5", having the ability to high point and back shoulder. Just think that gives the advantage to Georgia against whoever they're playing. So I think this group is better than it was last year, and I don't foresee us leading the whole league in drop passes this year.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I feel like I've seen enough or heard enough to state with some confidence I think this year's wide receiver core for Georgia will be better than it was a year ago. And Terrence, where I would take that is, I don't think you can evaluate Gunnar Stockton without bringing that into the equation. You know, do I expect Stockton to win the Heisman Trophy this year? I do not. Do I expect Stockton to play so well this year that he leaves Georgia as a number one pick at the end of this season? If I'm being candid, I would say that I do not. Do I think that Stockton can get the job done for Georgia this season? I do. And part of the reason I feel that way is A, because I like some of the stuff that Gunnar Stockton does. B, it's also I like the guys that he's throwing to. I don't think you can evaluate Stockton in just the fishbowl of whatever he is. I think you've got to bring the receivers into that conversation too. And when Georgia throws it, I think anyway, I really like who Stockton's throwing it to, right?
I do too. I like, from the tight end room with Oscar and Lucky and that group, along with the receivers. I just think we was best in our, back-to-back national championship. We had that ability to throw the ball out the backfield with James Cook and Kenny McIntosh. So having that ability to throw the ball to a running back out the backfield with Cash Jones, I just think that's another element that we haven't spoke about enough that was really, really important in those two national championship years. So getting back to putting weapons around the quarterback definitely helps. And I think we have weapons from the tight end room, the running back room, and the running back and the receiver room as well.
I think you're bringing up a really good point. And if I'm guilty of something, we probably don't talk about Cash Jones enough. We don't talk about him a ton on this show, and it's probably certainly not an intentional oversight or certainly not intentionally sliding him. It's just something we may be guilty of not giving him enough attention. But as you're saying what you're saying, and I'm thinking back to last year, and maybe this was an indictment on some of the other stuff happening for Georgia, Cash may have gotten behind the defense about as well as anybody, to the point where if you're looking to make, kind of a big throw and you needed somebody to create some separation with a guy in coverage, there was a portion of last season that Cash was probably doing that better than almost anybody. And you mentioned James Cook. My gosh, Cook just majorly cashed in at the NFL level, kind of being a traditional running back in the NFL right now. But, at Georgia, he was that sort of pass-catching running back. And I think you're bringing up a really good point that really good Georgia offenses have had the dynamic of, can I throw to a running back? Kenny McIntosh once was that. James Cook may have been as good at that as anybody was. And honestly, last year, Cash Jones was probably better at some of that kind of stuff than he was given credit for. Certainly, we probably haven't talked about that enough. But adding the dimension of also finding a way to throw to the running back, not as a replacement for the running game, but as an additive to the other stuff you're doing offensively, the best Georgia teams have really done that, right?
I think so. And I personally believe that's where Bell could come in at. The years that we had some injuries at the running back position and Dylan Bell went back and played some running back. And I think we get back to that. I hope we get back to that. Just being versatile, putting players in position to succeed. And I think Dylan Bell can throw the football out the backfield. He can run the football. We actually saw that now. It's just not when we bring him into the backfield, it's not just to throw it to him. That's just a different dimension that I think he exceeds at, and that's when he played his best football, in my opinion, when we put him in multiple roles, just not lining him up at X or Z, allowing him just to be a true receiver. He's a ball player, in my opinion.
Oh, I think you're right. I love Bell in the backfield. We enjoyed that in 2023. Didn't see that as much in 2024. We think we're going to see more of it this year. I am 100% in favor of that. I will say, though, the old school part of my brain, Terrence, if we're going to line Dylan Bell up in the backfield, we got to get him at 86. I can't have 86 lining up as tailback. I got to get him in a 30-something or something like that. I like him at running back, but I may need him in a different number if he's going to line up in the backfield, Terrence. That's the old school part of my brain talking.
I think so as well. It's he loves 86, so he hasn't changed it, and he's going to rock 86. I just need 86 doing what he did in 2023, just being that versatile football player, and that's when he really excelled. So I'm excited to see how they use him this year. Hopefully, he's being used like we used him in 2023.
I love it, Terrence. Great stuff. I appreciate it. We wish Mount Vernon the best of luck as you guys get going with your 2025 season. We'll also remind folks they want to connect. You're talking football. You're training folks, both tackle football and now flag football too. For people who want to connect with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can they do it?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. We'll look forward to talking to you very soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think the point about Dylan Bell is a really good one there from Terrence Edwards. I do. I think it's interesting. And, I think, look, and the point that he makes about, Cash Jones sort of throwing out of the, the backfield, I think that's all, really interesting too, that that's something that Georgia, its best teams have done well. Cash Jones does that better than we probably giving him credit for. And some of that could be a part of the Georgia offense this season. Look, a little bit of this is going to have to be just sort of a kitchen sink type thing of, Georgia going to throw the ball to the backfield. Sometimes I have hunches and suspicions. This is not reporting, in other words, but my suspicion is we'll probably see a lot of Bell out of the backfield, maybe even more of that than the kind of the traditional wide receiver thing, just because there's just only so many snaps to go around, and there are guys, the receiver position, that are going to have to play. Colby Young, assuming he's healthy, is going to have to play. Noah Thomas, assuming he's healthy, is going to have to play. Zachariah Branch, assuming he's healthy, is going to have to play. So given some of this sort of thing, it's a good thing to have some versatility. London Humphreys, for instance, we believe he can play all three receiver positions. Good year to be able to do that because, there's a lot of competition in all these spots. Dylan Bell, we know he can kind of be more of the sort of creative, versatile weapon beyond just a traditional wide receiver. This is probably a good year to have that club in your bag. So I think Terrence is bringing up some pretty interesting stuff right there. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I want to take a moment to remind you that as we are kind of in the late summer portion of 2025, when you think about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, I want you to be thinking about a year from now, several months from now. You know, sometimes long-range planning for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, I would say that it's probably the best way to get the best price. History sort of bears that out. It's also the best way to get the best selection of like staterooms, or if you want to book some of the special experiences, for instance, the Royal Beach Club, things like that, that's about to open. The sooner you book, the more opportunity you're going to have to add the sort of special add-ons to the vacation that makes it a great experience. That's also true when we're thinking about our DawgNation cruise. It comes up next April 20th through the 24th of next year on Utopia of the Seas. We've had hundreds of you join us on our DawgNation cruise in the past, and we want to remind you that the time is now to be planning for next year's cruise. Sailing out of Port Canaveral on April the 20th, going to the Nassau in the Bahamas, Perfect Day Coco Cay. Don't forget, when we go to Nassau, the Royal Beach Club will be open. You get a chance to have that great experience. And of course, Perfect Day Coco Cay remains as great as it can be. And frankly, Utopia of the Seas is one of my favorite cruise ships that Royal Caribbean's ever produced. It's the newest, the latest in the Oasis class of ship. And when we had a chance to sail on Utopia of the Seas last year for our DawgNation cruise, I was so proud to show that off to a lot of our DawgNation cruisers who had either never been on a cruise before or had never been on Utopia of the Seas. I'd had the great experience a couple of times of being on Utopia of the Seas. I knew they were going to love it. I was so proud of how true that turned out to be, and I want you to have the same experience too. So please, give our friend Jessica Slater a call, travel advisor. Now, Jessica's on Star of the Seas right now. I'm jealous of her for that. Wish I was with her. But you can still probably connect with Jessica. And if not, she got people who can help you. 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also find her online. That's an email address, jslater@dreamvacations.com. That is jslater@dreamvacations.com. Be a part of an awesome Royal Caribbean cruise vacation with DawgNation, April 20th through the 24th of 2026. We'll see you on board for the DawgNation cruise. Jessica Slater can tell you how to get there. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean right now. Let me just tell you this. I feel like you can really feel this in the air right now. How excited are you about the opening week of the 2025 season? We're always happy to have football back, and it doesn't really involve Georgia this year. You know, Georgia's played the big week one games before, does not do that this year. But my gosh, these week one games, they're just amazing. Obviously, the number one example of that is Texas against Ohio State. That's as big as it gets. And we don't like Ohio State. We don't like Texas. We think that both these teams at times probably have a little bit of a extra inflation on the part of some in the media. We kind of think that. A lot of Georgia fans do too. But you can think that and still not think the game is overrated. You know, Texas perpetually overrated. Ohio State sometimes overrated. Maybe that's true. Is this game overrated? No, it is not. This is unbelievable. What a remarkable week one game. I can't wait for it. It's interesting, and this kind of goes back to something I've talked about a little bit. I try to limit my gambling talk, but there are some aspects of point spreads that are just fascinating. This is sort of one of those. Texas is the consensus, not quite unanimous, but certainly consensus number one team, yet they're an underdog week one to Ohio State. Most of that's just sort of a function of home field advantage for the Buckeyes, but this is where the odds, if we're being honest, do make the game more interesting. Be careful if you want to actually bet it, but the odds make the game more interesting. I can't help but feel that way. That's just sort of the way that it is. I think that Alabama against Florida State is an interesting game. I don't believe that Florida State is very good this year. I don't think Tommy Castellanos, who comes over as the quarterback for the Seminoles, is quite a game-changing player, although I do think adding Deuce Robinson to the pass-catching core for the Seminoles, that's probably a pretty big deal. Some of this for me is just sort of a referendum on Alabama. You know, can they make it look easy against Florida State? With Ty Simpson now firmly established the starting quarterback, I don't like feeling this way, but I do sort of feel this way, that Alabama's probably a little undervalued, that if we're kind of saying, people don't realize how good Georgia is, sometimes we sort of say something to that effect. People don't realize how good Georgia is. Well, if that's true for Georgia, boy, it seems like some of that might be true for Alabama as well. I think it's Georgia's toughest game on paper for the 2025 season. How much can they show that week 1 against Florida State? I think that's probably one we'll be watching closely. LSU Clemson, oh my gosh, what a game this is. LSU has circled it. They've said we want to win it because obviously they've had some trouble in week 1. Clemson, though, is the home team. They are also the favorite. That line seems to be growing in Clemson's direction. This is a Clemson team that folks believe can win the national championship. What a big deal that is. Then you get to the Sunday game. You got Notre Dame against Miami. What I find interesting about this is if you want to go back to prior to the 2024 season, this is right after Nick Saban retired. This was a new landscape for college football where now not only was Kirby Smart the best coach in the sport, the narrative prior to last season was it's not really obvious who's the closest to being alongside Kirby Smart. After all, Jim Harbaugh had left the sport too. Dabo Swinney at the time was kind of thought to be receding a bit, kind of a far cry from their national championships of the past. Kirby was the best coach in college football, and we didn't know who kind of the next group of great coaches were going to be. Well, new information comes through during the 2024 season. It certainly seems like there's a new collection of, potential great coaches in the sport. I think one of those guys maybe is Marcus Freeman. Notre Dame was good last year. They made the national championship game. They beat Georgia. You have to give them their flowers at least somewhat. The game against Miami is interesting in that, okay, well, now this is a Notre Dame that's had some changeover at coordinator, lost some of the pieces they had a year ago, including quarterback. They got a big-time prospect, we think, in Carr, that's going to, I think, be the starter there, although he hasn't been named yet. So this is a Notre Dame team that is still expected to be among the best, but kind of in transition a bit. This is, in other words, the sort of game against Miami, the sort of year for the Irish, where Marcus Freeman could really demonstrate himself to truly be among the very best coaches in college football. That's a fascinating storyline for that. I'll leave you with kind of one final thought on all of this. Once again, to kind of bring the odds back into this. A year ago, the SEC was the only Power 4 league to have a winning record against other Power 4 teams in non-conference play. You never hear about that, and there's, we think, reasons why you don't, but it was no less true. The SEC had a winning record in non-conference games against Power Conference opponents. It's the only league that could say that. We've been told now for months, the SEC is no longer the top dog in college football. Those are the words that people use, but sometimes actions don't match words, and you understand this. We oftentimes ourselves don't quite do what we say we want to do. Sometimes words and actions aren't in perfect alignment with each other. In college football, I think we have a good example of this too. Some of the people who say the SEC is down, the Big Ten is better, the SEC doesn't dominate quite like it used to, when actually given a chance to put their money where their mouth is, they simply don't back up with actions what their words say. AP poll that came out just a few days ago is a classic example of this. Some of the same writers that spun a anti-SEC narrative when they had a chance to put their top 25 teams out, what they put 10 SEC teams in there. It's a record for one conference in one preseason top 25. So we're told over and over again, SEC is down, but when given a chance to reflect that in a preseason top 25, no one actually does it. And I think this is the sort of thing that could matter. So maybe take an extra look relative to expectations of an LSU playing a Clemson or a Alabama playing a Florida State, maybe a Texas playing an Ohio State, but frankly, I'm not quite ready to kind of put Texas in the same category of the heritage SEC teams. I want to normalize using the phrase heritage SEC. Texas not quite there for me yet. But when you're watching, and a lot of this is going to play out for the first couple of weeks. It's not just week one. It's sort of the first couple of weeks. Watch SEC against Power 4 non-conference opponents. I have a sneaking suspicion, and I am not, emotionally neutral on this. I am not, necessarily objective, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong. I have a little bit of a suspicion in the early couple of weeks of non-conference play, we could see a little bit of an Empire Strikes Back moment from the SEC in some of these games. And I've told you before, I find preseason polls to be a little bit more meaningful than some folks realize. There's more signal than noise for me in those. And I think some of the preseason poll stuff is an indication of this, that the demise of the SEC, spoken loudly by many, perhaps is greatly overstated. The actions of poll voters, the wisdom of crowds, if you believe in that, maybe give voice to that. Just keep that in mind and file that away as we get ready to watch some really fun non-conference games in now just a couple of weeks when the season is upon us. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And before we get ready to wrap up here today, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Cercheros. It's a really important time to be thinking about Cercheros because a lot of you are getting ready for tailgating, watch parties. The season is almost here, and our friends at Cercheros, the fresh Mex that they're famous for, is a great option for you. If you want to go just in the restaurant and have a great lunch, well, of course, they're going to do that for you. They'll grill your veggies. They sort of freshly prepare your food as you come through. It's one of the reasons why we call it fresh Mex, because it's like made fresh for you when you go in the store. And that's something I think you should do. There are locations all across our area here right now, more than 40 around Georgia and the Southeast, growing at a regular basis. But I also want you to think about Cercheros for your game watching parties that you're having at your home or the big tailgate parties that you're having in Athens. A great way to get everybody fed at a tailgate, important thing. Our friends from Cercheros give you a chance to do that. I'm talking about bowls, burritos, quesadillas, nachos, tacos, and so much more. It's friendly Tex-Mex, served fresh every day and delivered to you in some cases or prepared fresh for you for your own tailgate and watch party. So find out more about this at Cercheros.com. That is Cercheros.com. And I'm not supposed to say this, but I will. We actually have a fun thing coming up with Cercheros here in the very near future. So I'll tell you more about that here in a little bit when I'm authorized to. But for now, just know Cercheros, great option for you. Watch parties, tailgate parties, getting ready for a fun 2025 season. Online to find out more right now, it is Cercheros.com. One of the things we love about Georgia, this is true for coaches and players, Georgia fans, those around the program, many instances of the passion that exists for Georgia football being channeled in a positive direction, in some cases involving things that have nothing to do with football. Our friends, and you've probably heard of them if you're online, Bulldogs Battling Breast Cancer, an example of that. They do good work, and they're raising money here right now. Jordan Jenkins helping out with that. He is donating $100 per sack here this season. And the folks at Bulldogs Battling Breast Cancer have a goal of raising $2,500 per sack here this year. So they're making sure everybody knows this. So you can go to find them. I'm going to give you, it's BBBC_Athens if you were to find this on X. A good way to connect with Bulldogs Battling Breast Cancer. They do great work raising money for a very important cause. So check that out. We'll give them a golden shoe for the great work they're doing. And Jordan Jenkins, who wants to be a part of this there as well. So you'd love to see that. Lousy, stinking Gators. How about a Gatorade updater? 1,741 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. So Steve Spurrier can take his old, antiquated jabs at Stetson Bennett. Goofy Florida writers can laugh at it. But ain't nobody laughing in Jacksonville in recent years because dogs on top. We don't see that changing anytime soon. I will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, plumbing, heating, and electric needs. You're going to talk about a yeoman's effort today. Voice was a little shot. Almost nothing in the way of sleep. I look terrible, by the way. And yet somehow we just kind of rolled right through, had what I thought was, if you don't mind me saying, a decent show. Sometimes you just got to call it what it is. That is just a professional effort right there. So good stuff. My voice may give out while we're doing the cool down here. I don't know what's going on with this. You know, I will admit that every year, because we do so many games for the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic, it does usually put a strain on my voice, I will say. I was sort of feeling that prior to the start of games last night. I've dealt with this. You may have, if you're a very, very close listener, you may have detected some of this. I was pretty concerned about it because I don't normally get that. But just had a little something going on. And yet, you power through because that's what you do. Boy, you get a little nice little ring there too. So you power through, and we got all of that done here today. Let me go to DawgNation.com to the chat. UGA Marine brings up a good point. Another really fun early season non-conference game is Auburn at Baylor. This is a Baylor team that's not bad. You know, Dave Aranda's done some okay things. You know, almost every team in the Big 12 is at least serviceably good. Auburn's got to go to McLean Stadium there for that game. And Auburn's favored on the road. And it's another instance where the point spread's actually moving in Auburn's direction. If Auburn is able to go into Waco and the banks of the Brazos and win with some comfort, I do think it's a semi-significant statement. I do. Senior Dog 54 says the Braves rolled out a 38-year-old who's been has been last night, who gave up 6 earned runs, 6 hits, 3 walks, and 2 innings. Surely there's a young guy that they could bring up that's better than that. However, they did come back and get the win last night. So at this point in time, they are just kind of playing out the string. SEM Dog says, did you see the Athletic proclaimed Texas is the new Alabama based on money in NFL draft? I guess the Kirby years at Georgia don't count. Kirby has got to be loving this hype, determined to anoint anybody but Georgia. Yeah, I have to say I do think this is weird. I don't think this is coming from sort of a thin-skinned place. I saw some version of this, and it's a weird thing because I actually do think that Steve Sarkisian has done a good job building Texas into a formidable foe and challenger. I do. I think they deserve, kind of some credit for that. But I don't know. It does just sort of seem like a lot right now, doesn't it? I would say that's kind of crazy. Can we let them win a national championship before they say the next Alabama? And if you're going to start citing draft picks and things like that, is Georgia having any kind of problem getting guys drafted here? I don't think they are. And I do get it. They got the money. I do get that. But y'all, who has the biggest payroll in Major League Baseball? It's the Los Angeles Dodgers. I don't know if you've noticed this. The Dodgers are not in first place right now. So money clearly matters. It makes a lot of things a good bit easier. But you can buy contention in sports. You can buy a championship contender. But I'm not 100% convinced you can buy the actual championship itself. I'm just not. So Texas does have, obviously, the most money to spend of SEC teams. It is a very big fan base that's hungry for success, and the media always serves that. It just does. The media, I don't care what the people who do it say, it is an incentive-driven market like anything else. And there's a huge incentive to try to cozy up to a very big fan base like Texas in a very big state. It's one of the reasons why the SEC, I think, has given some deference to Texas, because the presence of Texas, because it's a larger market, it just makes the SEC bigger as you bring them in. So cozying up to a big fan base, there's just a lot of incentive to do that. And that's, even as somebody who thinks that right now Texas is kind of on the right track, it just sort of seems like it has to be some of what this is, because what if we just let them actually win a championship before we sort of crown them the next anything? Senior Dog 54 says whoever wins the national title these days basically bought it. I don't 100% buy into that, no pun intended. People said that about Ohio State a year ago. Look, I think you can buy yourself into contention. You certainly can't have a good team without money in any sport. But, and I hate the Buckeyes, I do. But you can't watch what they did a year ago. Big play Jack Sawyer, for instance. The sort of, strip sack touchdown. You can't watch what Ohio State did a year ago and say that was only money. You just can't. And I hate Ohio State. There's not a part of me that wants to give them credit for anything. But if I try to stare into this screen, which is essentially looking you in the eye, and say, yeah, Ohio State, they just bought their championship, in my soul, I don't believe that's true. They spent a lot of money on NIL to make themselves a very strong contender. But the big steps towards the championship were made on the field by guys coming up big in big moments, and having all the money in the world does not necessarily help you at that time. And if we're being honest, a lot of the money that Ohio State spent a year ago was spent keeping guys in the program as opposed to just going out and getting the Quinshon Judkins or the Caleb Downs. And that's not a popular statement. Most of my audience would prefer that not be said, but I do believe that's true. Let us get some YouTube. Croking 123 says you can buy yourself a national title in today's game. It's all moment and injury luck these days. Ohio State pushed over by incredibly mad because Michigan beat them very badly. Yeah, once again, I love Croking's comments. You can buy yourself the chance at a championship. For instance, the Pittsburgh Pirates aren't winning anything. The Cincinnati Reds, teams like that, the Athletics, they're not winning anything. You can buy yourself a chance at a championship. But who actually wins is determined by the big moments that happen. And we saw that with Texas. It's like, they can put a roster together that certainly on paper on par with Georgia. But the big plays, the toughness in the right moments in October and December, Texas didn't have enough of it. All the money in the world didn't help you in that situation. Foster Moss says Ohio State did nothing different than what Georgia did this offseason. We have to be fair. Yeah, I mean, Georgia's certainly spending its share of money too. It's not spending the most money, but it's also not like Georgia's not grossed out by the idea of paying players. I'm not quite so sure that that soils our integrity. I don't believe in any form or fashion that's the thought around Georgia. I think that Georgia's cognizant of who makes what, and I do think that Georgia's trying to maintain some sort of locker room balance, and that may be a losing battle, but they're trying to do that for right now. But Georgia is certainly not morally offended by the idea of paying players. It wouldn't have gotten the guys that it got if it was. Chris Jacobs encourages people to hit the like button. I certainly appreciate that. Silent Chaos shouting out Palpatine. I appreciate that too. Palpatine, misunderstood. This will never happen. They'll never do this. Even if it was an animated series, though. I would love to see Star Wars retold through the perspective of Palpatine. We do this with like Disney movies now. They kind of like, hey, maybe Cruella de Vil was misunderstood. Disney does this a lot. And I don't like it when Disney does it. But I would love it because I'm a big fan of the classic Disney movies for the most part. And by the way, there's just sort of nothing wrong with being bad. Sometimes people are just bad. And I'm sorry, someone who wanted to eat dogs like Cruella de Vil is just bad. We don't need to reinvent any of that. Or make them into a code or whatever it was she wanted to do. The point is, I would love to see Star Wars retold through the perspective of Emperor Palpatine. Kind of a galaxy was sort of a messy place. Everybody's always like fighting and complaining. And, it's like essentially proving itself to be ungovernable. And Palpatine just sort of brought all that to, just sort of cleaned it all up. I could stand to see Star Wars told through Palpatine's eyes.
Just making sure I'm quoting you correctly here. People that eat dogs are bad.
That's exactly right. Cruella de Vil and the like, for sure. I mean, she wanted to eat the dogs, right? That's what she wanted to do. And I know that's the whole thing about whatever, but I think that's what she wanted to do, right?
Can't say I've brushed up on my 101 Dalmatians.
See,
I don't have a daughter. So.
Yeah, see, this is one of my great traditions. Is like my daughter and I will wake up early because my son, my wife, they like to sleep late. My daughter and I usually wake up much earlier. So for as long as she's been alive, certainly old enough to remember, we'll watch classic Disney movies on like Saturday morning, just kind of one of our traditions. And so a lot of these classic Disney movies, I have watched them over and over and over again. I mean, I've seen, and I enjoy watching them, and obviously time spent with my daughter like that, the best stuff in the world. But you gain, I think, a special appreciation. And we don't like watch anything, certainly post 2010s. I mean, most of this is like 90s and older, and frankly, a lot of it's the 1950s. So like we have a very old school kind of motif around our house. It's a lot of like 1950s classic. And by the way, the animation is gorgeous in these movies. It's amazing. I don't know why, but like somehow animation just gets worse. Like you go back and look at the stuff that like Walt was doing in like the 1930s, way better than what exists right now. Way better. But this is not that kind of show. So Mike says that she did not want to eat the dog. She just wanted the fur. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. By the way, I want to read this. You always love getting this one. Our buddy Jonathan Aaron says, I can tell that you're tired today. You got those bags under your eyes. Yeah. You hate to hear that. That's never what you want to hear. It's just kind of one of those things. Unfortunately, that's the case. Austin 11 says, good morning, BA. Counting down the days. We have the Dogs back on Saturday. Boy, I'm looking forward to that too. And Austin says he hopes we're doing well today. Austin, I hope you're doing well today too. Thanks for being a part of the show. We appreciate that. Somebody mentioned Justice Fitzpatrick, I guess, kind of an ongoing recruitment. I've heard some chatter about that. I don't know what's real and what's not. Obviously, at one point in time, Fitzpatrick said he shut down his recruitment. I just simply don't know, but I have at least heard some of that. Gary Roach says, Texas hadn't even won the SEC, and they're trying to make them the best team in the SEC. Yeah, I mean, there's just been a lot of that. And the one thing that we believe is if you're a Georgia fan, I think you're within your rights to notice. I do. And people get so like worked up about that. But if you're a Georgia, I'm talking about people when it comes to Georgia. I don't think enough people have bent the knee when it comes to the success that Georgia's had. I just don't. I don't think they have. I need to see more people bend the knee when it comes to Georgia. I just do. And I'm not sorry for feeling that way. So when as many, and listen, I don't even mind Texas being preseason number one. I'm not even actually that mad at that. But Texas was not better last year than Georgia. They just weren't. And I don't think I should have to explain why. I just don't. And Texas is not Alabama when Texas has, certainly in the last 2 decades, this many national championships. Can we just not do that? I mean, that does not seem a hard ask, but it sort of proves impossible.
This just in. Homecoming has been announced.
Is that right?
It'll be Kentucky.
Well, there you go. Georgia, of course, a history of not exactly playing great against Kentucky, but the days of the days of homecoming being a thing. I think last year the homecoming game, I believe, was Auburn. And that was like, ooh, yeah, that's a zinger. When I was a kid, Georgia played like William and Mary on homecoming. Now homecoming's just a day on the calendar. The idea, you want to have the good, easy win for how many people really come home on homecoming anymore? I guess some do. But the notion of, we got to go back to the old college town, homecoming's coming up. Is that even still a thing? And admittedly, I'm not as entrenched in academic world as some of y'all are. But how much is homecoming really even a thing anymore? I know they still crown kings and queens and whatnot, but let's see what else. Yeah, so apparently, and Brene Blackburn also confirms this. So Cruella DeVille only wanted the fur. Where did I get she was wanting to eat the dogs? Where did I get that from? But yes, she only wanted the fur. So she only wanted to kill 101 dogs for their fur. Gary McConnell says, 10 years of DawgNation Daily. Our first year was Rick's final year. Says it seems like it's been longer than that. We certainly have enjoyed that. It's been a great 10 years for us. Brian Whitaker says those are priceless moments, time with your kids like that. It really is. I'm just telling you, I just love it. And it's created sort of a special bond for us. It's one of those things, too, where I didn't grow up. When I was a child in the 80s, that was not a huge Disney era. It's Little Mermaid comes out in 89. By the time that came out, obviously, that's sort of a girl thing anyway, but, that just missed me. I didn't have a sister, so that never showed up in our house. But then you kind of go from that to like Beauty and the Beast in 91. Now, all these movies I've watched a million times since then, but it just wasn't a big deal to me for obvious reasons back then. You go from Little Mermaid to Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, everybody saw that in 1994. And so like Disney kind of became the force that we've sort of thought of it as in the 90s. I would say the 80s were not necessarily a Disney decade. Most of that decade was just sort of re-racking the same sort of like classic movies they'd been dragging out of the Disney vault for like most of the previous half century. Trevor Maffetone says, is Juan Gaston competing for a tackle or a guard spot? Right now, he is competing to be the starter at right guard. He's at least in the mix for playing time there. I do believe that Gaston is probably a tackle of the future. He certainly could be. Trevor Maffetone says, nice recovery in The Little Mermaid. I don't make any listen, I wouldn't have liked that movie when I was younger for obvious reasons, but honestly, I kind of enjoy that kind of stuff now. You get into it and you watch it with your daughter, it ends up being kind of fun. Johnny Prescott says, what did Dabo do in the portal this offseason? I think they did, obviously not a game-changing player, but they did take a transfer, right? That was kind of like the thing. They finally took one. Dabo is really committed to his principles in a way that I find respectable. I do. I'm not saying that it's good to never take transfers, but I do think it's good to continue to do what you think is right, even if everybody else thinks you're wrong. I think that Dabo Swinney's really good at that. It's one of the reasons why I like football is because I think coaches oftentimes model admirable behavior. And, Dabo Swinney takes a lot of criticism. A lot of people just sort of turn Dabo into the kind of the butt of a joke. Dabo, for a long time now, has done it his way, and it has worked. Many trips to the college football playoff, including last year, 2 national championships. They are among the favorites this year. The fact that Dabo has kept on doing it the way that he wants to do it, even though a lot of people kind of think they know more than he does. We talk a lot about the kind of urban-rural divide. No better example of that than Dabo Swinney and the sort of prevailing media perspective. Media heavily influenced by kind of big city culture. Dabo is as homespun and small town as it gets. So Dabo and the kind of prevailing logic promoted by most media voices could not be more different. And therefore, Dabo is sort of commonly treated as like a joke. But no one's laughing when he continues to win as much as he has. And while I don't like Clemson, I do like adherence to principle, and Dabo Swinney clearly has that. Frederick Meredith says, I respect Dabo standing his ground, but I don't necessarily like him. Yeah, and as a sports fan, that's just kind of the way it goes. It's like, I could say good things about someone like this, but given the fact that he coaches one of, Georgia's competitors, you sort of wish it wasn't true. But, you can sort of think two things at once. Frederick, I think that's a good point. Billy Cloud says to everyone have a blessed and safe day. Billy, we appreciate that. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming says, whoops, I'm way late today. Well, we're glad you're here nonetheless, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. Gary Holt says, so far, biggest news, maybe no big injuries. And I would say it's been pretty good news on that front here thus far. Hopefully that remains true. Josh Hobbs says, I'm not going to go down that road. Josh also says that the homecoming game, typically the most lackluster crowd. Boy, it used to really be that way. It used to be that on homecoming day, so you had 6 home games. And listen, I hate to say this, but like it used to be that homecoming and senior day kind of ruined the pregame vibe. I love seniors, and I get, I'm sentimental, so I like, seniors kind of getting their moment on the field. But when you're announcing all these seniors, it kind of kills you want to get fired up before the start of a game, especially senior day oftentimes is it's a rivalry game. In some years, it might have been Auburn, it might have been Tech. You want to have a fired up game, but senior day kind of took away from some of that. Homecoming really did because you had the alumni band and stuff like that. It just kind of killed the vibe for some of this. I think they're doing a better job now of when you have a homecoming or a senior day, one of these sort of rites of passage, the pregame stuff still, for the most part, goes on unabated, and I do think that's a positive step. Alex Berger pointing out that Vanderbilt was a very frequent homecoming opponent of Georgia, and that is true. Let's get a few more. Earl Smith looking forward to Bo Walker, hoping for some good things from him too. Indeed I am. Let's see what else. Our buddy Stink says, Texas is a team of, quote, my brand. Georgia's a team of we have a mission. And yeah, boy, it seemed like that was, seems like that can be true. And I certainly hope that it is. Now, here is where I do have to be honest. And, I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror if I didn't tell you the truth. One of the things that concerns me a little bit about some of this related to Texas is if we go back to 2023, the most talked about team of that offseason was Michigan. We kind of laughed. Remember Reese Davis saying what he said, gonna, do whatever. Well, as it turns out, guys like Reese Davis were right that year. Last year, because of the stuff they had done in the transfer portal and everything else, Ohio State was kind of the most talked about team of the last offseason. They were, and they also won the national championship. Texas is probably the most talked about team of this offseason. Arch Manning's been a big part of that. Recent history maybe suggests that's kind of a good thing. Now, neither Ohio State or Michigan were preseason number one the way that Texas is. We don't see a lot of preseason number ones win the national title, but teams generating the offseason hype, that's been a pretty good place to be the last couple of years. As Georgia fans, we sort of mocked some of that, but honestly, sometimes the haters get it right, and the last couple of years they kind of did. So when you're like, boy, I can't wait for all this Texas hype to be proven wrong. We didn't quite get our wish on that with Michigan in 2023 or Ohio State in 2024. At least got to be honest about that. Paul Moon says, I wonder if we'll see Sokovie wide at all. So I'm a big fan of Sokovie. I love the CAS program that he comes from. I think that's a program that does it the right way. Here's what I think is going to be tricky, whether it's Sokovie or somebody else. So Zachariah Branch is going to play, and he is going to play a lot from the slot position. In addition to that, Georgia wants to use two tight ends a lot, and we think it's going to be rotating at least three tight ends pretty regularly. We know Delp and Lucky will be that. I really think that Jaden Riddell is going to play some right now too. So I think it's a tricky time to be one of the Georgia, what you might think of as like a slot receiver for Georgia. I think it's a tricky time because Georgia on paper would appear to have a really good slot guy in Branch. Other guys like Humphreys sometimes in that spot, Sokovie sometime in that spot. Also multiple tight ends kind of in that spot too. I am not ready to say yet who it's going to be, but there are going to be some promising Georgia receivers who are not going to play as much this year as they want to. For instance, from the freshman class, there's a really good chance that both Talon Taylor and C.J. Wiley, for instance, don't both play a lot. I think one of them is likely to play a good bit. I would say that one of them is probably just the numbers game. You get caught up in that at some point in time. And someone from the sort of veteran Georgia wide receivers, and by veterans I just simply mean guys who've been here, somebody from that is likely to maybe not play as much as you might think. I just think that's one of those things that could happen. Austin 11 says Georgia's not really known for playing freshmen, but if freshman's on the field, that could be a good sign. In the case of like a Juan Gasson, I think that's the case. You know, I do think for any freshman, though, even a guy like, say, Elijah Griffin or, you know, some of the stuff we've heard about Bo Walker and things like that, as a general rule, not always 100% guaranteed, but as a general rule, I do believe you got to temper expectation for freshmen. In other words, I think Elijah Griffin's likely to play for Georgia this year. The idea this is going to be, a great defensive lineman in year one, if I had to say, probably not. Bo Walker, clearly we've heard enough about him. He must be pretty good, but is he going to step to the forefront and be the sort of game-changing running back? Even at running back, a place where freshmen can play, I would still temper my expectations a bit. Maybe Talon Taylor you'll say that about, or others. Just be careful assuming too much with freshmen. For instance, like KJ Bolden sort of had a moonshot freshman season a year ago, and that was mostly defined as someone so young who Georgia trusted putting in the game. It's a trust factor that really kind of matters for freshmen more so than anything else. Jay Shibson said, did I tip back a few last night? No, Jay, I was working. Something you ought to try every now and then. Now, I will tell you this. So last night, got home about 1:45. We had Corky Cal Dave Hunter Classic. By the way, I'm not doing the games tonight, but they do continue from West Forsyth here this evening. Really fun doubleheader. There was a show in this calendar year that, and I don't just to be honest, I don't get hungover very much. I don't drink very much anymore. Rarely hungover. I was pretty hungover for a show this year. I don't think anybody ever knew. That's what a professional does, folks. There was a show that I showed up for, little banged up. And yet, because I'm a professional, nobody would have ever known. So Jay thinks he's smart, but the truth is, even if I was hungover, y'all'd never know. But no, that is not. Trevor Maffetone, no, that's not true either. Let's get a couple more. We're going to go. Paul Moon also brings up a really good point. KJ Bolden is not that big, and this is one of the things I saw in high school. Not everything you see in high school translates, but obviously Buford plays a high level of competition. Bolden is not big, but man, he is a missile. He will just throw his body at somebody. He does not mind putting his face on people. To not be the biggest guy in the world, KJ Bolden brings a lot of physicality. DeMarcos Thomas says that Pollock has predicted Clemson win the national title and doesn't have Georgia up there. We'll see if it's the case. I think that Clemson's probably good. I believe they're probably going to win the ACC, be one of the 12 playoff teams. But we're going on now about a half decade's worth of Clemson sort of not winning the kind of prove-it games that make you a true championship contender. Blown out by Georgia last year, lost to Texas in the playoff, lost to South Carolina multiple times in the Shane Beamer era. We'll see. It's a long time since like 2015 through 2020 when Clemson was in the playoffs 6 years in a row, and 2 of those resulted in national championships. Y'all, that starts to feel like a long time ago, and last year was a little bit of a reversal of course and kind of got them back in the mix, but they also benefited from a 12-team playoff a year ago too. So that's not necessarily a measuring stick for the quality of the team. It's just a function of the system that we're in. Let me go back to Dog Nation's chat for a second. Ken Holcomb says anyone that thinks Texas was better than the Dogs last season should just go back and look at the scoreboard. 100%. And once again, we are well within our rights to say the notion that Texas was ranked higher than Georgia in the season it's just the sort of, I have zero respect for that opinion. All right. Anything else here? Bill Camacho says he went to high school out in the West in the desert and said we always had homecoming right in the middle of October. So there you go. Let's see what else. Anything else here? UJ Marine shouting out jalapeno cornbread. I'm no problem with that for me. DT says homecoming is still a thing, so you love that. Appreciate hearing that. By the way, SEM Dog, going back to my comparison of Cruella de Vil and Emperor Palpatine. Look, I'm not saying it would be an easy story to tell. You've obviously got some, blowing up Alderaan is not a great thing to do. Tough. That's a tough one to spin. I don't dispute that. I'm just saying, if they did retell Star Wars from Palpatine's perspective, I think I'd probably watch that. I think it'd be interesting. Not easy. Palpatine has done some stuff, or under his authority, some things were done in that galaxy that were not great. But I do think I would watch that. All right, we are going to go. All right, really good stuff. Stick D says, speaking of Ellis Robinson, I don't understand why he didn't play early on, but I was wishing he was brought in versus Alabama last year. Look, the problem is let me try to speak English. The problem is this is a classic example we're talking about. Even a highly rated freshman, sometimes freshmen just kind of aren't ready. And I think a year ago, Robinson, if we're just being honest, just sort of wasn't ready. If he was ready, I do believe there were times last year when Georgia would have played him because Georgia, as you said, there were games last year when it needed some help. But Robinson not playing in those games, not an example of stubbornness on the part of Georgia. I think it's sort of just a matter-of-fact evaluation. We didn't hear word one about Ellis a year ago. That's changing now. We talked about this on the show yesterday. Ellis may be making his move. And I think that's good news. And kind of in keeping with what a traditional schedule for development would typically be. By the way, Frederick Meredith's got Georgia beating Texas 27-3. If Georgia beats Texas 27-3, we may come off just the hinges. I mean, that's going to be something. All right, good stuff. We got to go for now. Y'all check out RS Andrews online. rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on that today. Air conditioning, it's been hot again lately. That means there's more hot weather still to come. So stay cool especially if you're watching games early season. You don't want to be sweating through that. Stay cool. Get your AC tuned up to factory fresh specs so they'll keep you comfortable. Enjoy all of that. rsandrews.com to find out more today. Or if you have a plumbing emergency, RS Andrews can replace your water heater or kind of fix pipes, whatever else. The RS stands for rapid service. They show up quick. They help you get it done. You'll love that from our friends at RS Andrews. Find them online at rsandrews.com. We are back tomorrow for DawgNation Daily presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and we will look forward to speaking to you then.